Welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at a flight that lost all control mid-air. Something was wrong. The aircraft was still flying, but it no longer responded. The pilots were running out of options. If you enjoy real survival stories, don't forget to subscribe. On August 12, 1985, a passenger aircraft departed from Tokyo's Haneda Airport. It was a routine domestic flight to Osaka, scheduled to last less than an hour. For everyone on board, this was expected to be a normal and uneventful journey. The aircraft was a Boeing 747 operating during one of the busiest travel periods in Japan. It was the Obon holiday when millions of people return home to their families. Because of this, the flight was completely full. There were 509 passengers and 15 crew members on board. Families, workers, and children were all heading home. The atmosphere inside the cabin was calm and ordinary. The takeoff was smooth and the aircraft began climbing steadily. There were no unusual sounds or warnings. Everything appeared to be functioning exactly as expected. But deep inside the aircraft's structure, a hidden issue had been developing for years. It was not visible from the outside, and no one on board was aware of the danger. 7 years earlier, this same aircraft had experienced damage during landing. The rear pressure bulkhead required repair. At the time, the aircraft was returned to service. However, the repair was not completed according to proper engineering standards. Instead of a full structural reinforcement, a simplified method was used. The aircraft continued flying, but the weakness remained. Over time, repeated pressurization cycles placed stress on the repaired section. Small cracks began to form. These cracks slowly expanded with each flight. The damage progressed silently and without detection. There were no immediate warning signs, but eventually, the structure reached a critical limit. Approximately 12 minutes after takeoff, a sudden loud noise echoed through the aircraft. The rear pressure bulkhead failed. The cabin experienced a rapid loss of pressure. Oxygen masks deployed automatically and passengers reacted quickly. The sudden change created confusion inside the cabin, but the most serious problem was not immediately visible. At the same moment, the hydraulic systems began to fail. Control of the aircraft was quickly lost. The pilots suddenly realized they could no longer fly the plane in the normal way. Without hydraulic power, the control surfaces stopped responding as expected. The aircraft could no longer be steered using standard inputs. This was an extremely rare and critical situation. At the same time, part of the tail structure was lost. This reduced stability even further. The aircraft began to behave unpredictably. The plane started making uncontrolled movements in altitude and direction. It climbed and descended without precision. Turning became difficult and inconsistent. The pilots quickly realized that traditional control methods were no longer effective. They needed to find an alternative way to manage the aircraft. Time was extremely limited. After several attempts, they found a way to influence the aircraft. By adjusting engine power, they could gently change its direction. This became their only way to control the plane. Controlling the aircraft using engines required constant attention. Every adjustment had to be carefully timed. Even small changes could produce unexpected results. Despite the difficulty, the pilots managed to keep the aircraft in the air. Minute after minute, they continued their efforts. Their goal was to stabilize the plane and find a safe path. Inside the cabin, passengers began to understand that something was wrong. The unusual movements of the aircraft became more noticeable, and the situation was no longer routine. Some passengers remained calm, while others became increasingly concerned. A few began writing messages to their families, others held on to each other for support. The cabin crew continued assisting passengers and maintaining order. Their actions helped reduce panic. Even in a critical situation, they remained focused on their responsibilities. Meanwhile, the aircraft continued flying without full control. The pilots worked continuously, making small adjustments. Every second mattered. For 32 minutes, the aircraft remained in the air. This alone was remarkable given the level of system failure. The crew continued searching for a way to regain stability. However, maintaining altitude became increasingly difficult. The aircraft slowly began to descend. The pilots attempted to manage the descent using engine power. Below them was mountainous terrain. This limited their options significantly. Finding a safe landing area became more challenging with every passing minute. The aircraft's movements became more unstable as altitude decreased. Corrections were harder to control. The margin for error continued to shrink. The pilots remained focused, continuing their efforts until the final moments. They attempted to guide the aircraft away from the most dangerous terrain, but their control was extremely limited. Eventually, the aircraft impacted a remote mountain ridge. The location was isolated and difficult to access. Immediate rescue was not possible. Out of 524 people on board, only 4 survived. All of them were seated in the rear section of the aircraft, and this part of the fuselage remained relatively intact. The survival of these individuals was influenced by several factors. Seating position played a key role. Structural conditions also contributed. Despite serious injuries, the survivors remained conscious. They endured the night in difficult conditions. Their resilience played a critical role in their survival. Rescue teams did not arrive right away. The crash site was remote and difficult to reach. At first, no one knew if anyone had survived. By the time rescuers reached the site, valuable time had passed. This delay became one of the most discussed aspects of the disaster. It highlighted the importance of rapid response. The investigation that followed revealed the true cause of the accident. It was not weather or pilot error. The primary cause was structural failure. The rear pressure bulkhead had been repaired incorrectly years earlier. Over time, it weakened under repeated stress and eventually failed. This led to the loss of the hydraulic systems. From that moment, recovery was no longer possible. This single issue led to a complete loss of control. It demonstrated how one small decision can have long-term consequences. The impact was far-reaching. As a result of this accident, aviation safety procedures were improved. Maintenance standards became stricter. Inspection processes were enhanced. Airlines and aircraft makers added new safety checks. They also introduced stricter procedures. The goal was simple: to prevent this from happening again. Emergency response procedures were also reviewed. The importance of rapid deployment became clear. Time can determine outcomes in critical situations. Even decades later, this event is still remembered. It remains one of the most significant cases in aviation history. The lessons continue to influence safety practices. People still visit the crash site to pay their respects. Families remember those who were lost. For them, this is more than history. It is a story of human determination in the face of extreme circumstances. The pilots continued fighting despite overwhelming challenges. Their efforts extended the flight far beyond what seemed possible. It is also a story about responsibility and attention to detail. A single overlooked issue can grow over time, and its consequences can be far greater than expected. 32 minutes without control, a struggle to keep the aircraft in the air, and a reminder that even in the most difficult situations, people will continue to fight until the very end.